So last night I decided, after some discussion with the group that joined that session, to discuss the Fiat-Shamir transformation. So I think the plan moving forward will be the following. So I think next week I'm traveling again, so that will be an off week. But when we come back, I will we'll start talking about an interactive proof called the GKR protocol for circuit evaluation. So this is based on the SumCheck protocol, but it's considerably more complicated. It's arguably maybe the most complicated protocol discussed in the whole book, even though it is covered fairly early. And yeah, I don't want this topic to scare anyone away. I think the rest of the book does not actually build directly on the GKR protocol, but it's sort of natural to cover it early because it is an interactive proof. And once we cover interactive proofs for circuit evaluation, such as the GKR protocol, we can very rapidly jump to polynomial commitment schemes. And sort of once you have a polynomial commitment scheme and an interactive proof for circuit evaluation, you can put them together to get a snark, which is probably one of the, really the reason you're all here in this study group, is to understand how snarks work. And yeah, once we sort of see, interactive proofs for circuit evaluation, polynomial commitment schemes, and snarks, we can then discuss front ends, which is, I believe, chapter 6 of the book. So it's kind of hard to discuss front ends until you sort of understand what kinds of circuit satisfiability problems the snark backends like to work with. So this is, I guess, my planned flow of topics. So again, starting next session, we'll be discussing the GKR protocol, an interactive proof for circuit evaluation. The details of which we won't actually really directly build on, but once we know what is an interactive proof for circuit evaluation, we can kind of get to the good stuff really quickly. So the notions of polynomial commitments, how to combine them with interactive proofs for circuit evaluation to get snarks. And at that point, we can discuss front ends. These front ends are sort of the techniques that turn computer programs into circuits. So then you can apply a snark back into the circuit, into circuits. So the circuits are consumed by the snark backends. Okay, so that will be the planned flow. So this Fiat-Shamir transformation, I think it's a really important topic. It's kind of a standalone topic, although every time you apply Fiat-Shamir to a different interactive protocol, it does bring up its own sort of idiosyncrasies that come from the particular interactive protocol you're applying it to. But this Fiat-Shamir transformation is just a generic technique to turn interactive public coin protocols into non-interactive protocols. Okay, and most but not all snarks are designed by first giving a succinct public coin interactive argument and then rendering it non-interactive with Fiat-Shamir. So the main example of a snark that does not use Fiat-Shamir is the modern instantiation that's most popular is Growth 16. So that is not does not use Fiat-Shamir. So growth 16 and its predecessors. Um, but basically every other snark out there in use today does use Fiat-Shamir. So ones that do use Fiat-Shamir, Marlin, Planck, anything based on Fry, like Starks. So this would also mean like, Polygon ZKEVM, so Polygon Hermes and Plonky 2 and so forth. Spartan. Yeah, so everything but Grow 16 that's used today basically does use Fiat-Shamir. So that is what I will discuss today. And hopefully I worked out most of the kinks in this presentation last night. So yeah, let me pause there. That's kind of the plan for today and the coming weeks. Does anyone want to ask a question now before we actually get into Fiat-Shamir and how it works and what is its security? Okay, as usual, does someone want to just confirm that you can hear me and see my screen?
Yes, everything is fine.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so I'll just dive into Fiat-Shamir then. And again, as always, feel free to interrupt with questions. I think it makes things better. So yeah, let's imagine we start with a public coin interactive protocol. For now, let's just say that it's a 3-message protocol. That's really just for simplicity to start. If you want to make things really concrete, I guess the last couple sessions we've discussed the Suncheck protocol, which is a public coin interactive protocol, which typically has more than 3 messages. But just don't worry too much about that right now. So let's say the first message is from prover to verifier. Let's call it alpha. The second message is a random challenge from verifier to prover. Call it beta. And then the prover will respond to that challenge with a third message, gamma. And then the verifier decides whether to accept or reject. Okay, and the Fiat-Shamir transformation seeks to turn this into a non-interactive protocol, and it does so. It's sort of most cleanly presented as working in something called the random oracle model. Okay, the random oracle model, RO for short, is an idealized model, sort of meant to capture at a minimum like all known attacks on let's say natural natural protocols that use cryptographic hash functions. So it's kind of when someone designs a cryptographic hash function like SHA-256, their goal when designing SHA is roughly intuitively to make the hash function kind of act like a random oracle, and I'll tell you what it is in a second, to efficient adversaries. So roughly, this is very informal what I'm about to say, but the goal of whoever designed SHA-256 was to kind of make the outputs of SHA to sort of look random, at least to efficient adversaries. And if you want to, I guess, get a little more intuitive than that, the idea would be like there's sort of intuitively there should be like no way to predict the hash. So like SHA-256 of some X without like any faster than just computing it, like just hashing X and seeing what the output is. Okay, so in particular, that means, if you wanted to try to find a collision in SHA-256, that is like an X and a Y, such that They both hash to the same thing. SHA-X equals SHA-Y. So this would be like an just one implication of the hash function kind of behaving like a random oracle, meaning there's no way to sort of predict what the output of the function will be on any particular input without just computing it. So if you're looking to find a collision, the best algorithm would sort of just would just try, you could say random, or just like any sequence of x's and y's. Okay. Like there's not so the best attack should be what's called a birthday attack, which in which the attacker simply evaluates the hash function at a ton of inputs, and it chooses them arbitrarily because the whole point is, if it's a well-designed hash function, that the output should look random. So they're all inputs are roughly the same as far as the outputs appear to efficient adversaries. So the best attack to find a collision would evaluate SHA at many different inputs, storing all the results, storing all the outputs, say in a giant hash table, until it sees some output twice. So every time it evaluates SHA at a new input, it just sort of looks in the hash table looks it up in the hash table to see, have I seen this output before? And it just keeps going until it succeeds at finding a hash output that it had previously seen coming out of a different input that it had previously evaluated the hash function at. Okay, and so we can't concrete hash functions like SHA are not random oracles. In particular, there's efficient computer code that will take any x as input and very quickly spit out the hash value, SHA of x as output. A random oracle, you think of it as like if you evaluate it at some input x that you've never evaluated it at before, it'll spit out a random value. So just like a random string, if it spits out lambda bits outputs, it'll spit out a random string in 0, 1 to the lambda. So a uniform random string. And then if you let's say let's call the random oracle R. So of course, just like with the hash function, if you evaluate R at the same input x a second time, it'll spit out the same thing. So it's it's just like a hash function whose outputs are completely unpredictable. Like the only way to know what x hashes to is to just query the random oracle at x and see what the output is. But just like a hash function, if you everyone in the world is supposed to have query access to the random oracle. And if you evaluate so if Alice evaluates the random oracle at x and Bob evaluates the random oracle at x, they're going to see the same thing. But until either of them evaluates it at x, neither of them have any idea what the hash value will be. So this is an idealization of how we think concrete hash functions should behave. So to attack them, to find a collision in them, we think there's really nothing better that you can do than just evaluate it at input after input until you see a collision. And that is sort of for trivial reasons provably the best attack on a random oracle. But we can't actually prove that that's the best attack on finding a collision in SHA, because SHA is not truly a random oracle. Anyway, so with that sort of rambling exposition of the random oracle model out of the way, I can tell you, and I'll pause for questions in a moment because there probably are some. I'll tell you how the Fiat-Shamir transformation works. So the rough idea is, just for the prover, in the Fiat-Shamir protocol to produce what we call an accepting transcript of the interactive protocol. So that is a sequence of 3 messages, alpha, beta, gamma, such that, if the prover and verifier actually exchanged alpha, beta, gamma in the interactive protocol, the interactive verifier would accept. So we call this a transcript of the interactive protocol, and we call it an accepting transcript if the interactive verifier would have accepted on this sequence of messages being exchanged in the interactive one. But the key point is, so here the prover has complete choice, not just over alpha and gamma as in the interactive protocol, but also the prover itself is, quote, like providing the challenge, the verifier challenge beta here. That is exactly what needs to happen to kind of remove the interaction from the interactive protocol. Is we need the prover itself to sort of derive beta. If we want there to be no message from verifier to prover, we certainly can't allow the verifier in the non-interactive protocol to tell the prover what beta is. That would be interaction. So what the Fiat-Shamir transformation does is it demands that the prover like set beta to be the random oracle evaluated at alpha. Okay, so it's like rather than having the verifier choose the random challenge beta in the interactive protocol, we are having that random, quote, random challenge beta be derived by hashing the prover's first message. Okay, so that is the non-interactive Fiat-Shamir protocol. So a convincing proof for the Fiat-Shamir protocol is just a sequence of messages that the prover and verifier would have exchanged in the interactive one, that the interactive verifier would have accepted, where the verifier challenge is derived by hashing the preceding prover message. Okay, let me pause here and see if anyone has any questions. Okay. Okay. So I guess I should mention before I forget, because I did forget to mention this last night, that in general, let me try to squeeze this in here. When deriving the verifier challenge beta, one should hash everything an adversary might have control over. So I just said the prover's first message alpha here should be hashed. Clearly, the adversary has control over alpha because literally the prover gets to choose it at will. But there might be other things the adversary has control over. And I'm going to explain shortly in why you should do this. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because people keep messing this up. We keep seeing this security bug come up in deployed protocols, even though it's been known to be a bug for at least like 10 years or something. It started coming up in voting systems at least 10 years ago. And we've seen this come up in the last year in deployed snarks. So yeah, okay, maybe I'll jump down here and just explain the attack to have in mind, that sort of hashing everything under the prover's control will prevent. So let me just think for a second. So okay, let's say the prover, like the adversary chooses, has control over the statements it wishes to prove. So I don't know, I want to try to make this really concrete. So let's say, let's how would it change the statement? Let's say that the prover claims Okay, maybe I will keep it a little bit general. Let's just say the prover gets to choose the public input. Let's say let's do this. So the prover claims to know a satisfying assignment for some circuit C. Claims to know a W such that C of W equals 1. Okay, and P itself chooses the circuit. Okay. So I'm going to describe an attack for you, and I think there's an exercise in the book that kind of asks you to do this yourself. That will here's a way he can produce a convincing proof of some false statement. So for some circuit, let me call it C prime, that it knows a W such that C prime of W equals 1, when in fact P does not. Okay. So yeah, how do I want to do this? Man, this was the one thing I told myself I would remind myself about last night before today, and then forgot. But this one, I messed this up, something like this up last night, but hopefully this one should be much simpler. This attack, I should be able to do this today. So the idea is to, let me just think. So the, okay. All right, let me do this. I think this is going to be simpler. So let's fix the circuit. So the prover doesn't control the circuit, but does control the circuit takes like a fixed input X, the public input X that's known to the prover and the verifier.
Sorry.
Go. Yeah, please.
I have a quick question regarding the sentence you just said.
Okay.
When you say the prover choose the circuit, isn't always the circuit agreed upon by the prover and the verifier?
Yeah. So so the verifier needs to know the circuit that the prover is making a claim about. But I'm saying if the prover has free reign to like decide what circuit it's going to make a claim about, then you still can wind up in a situation if you don't hash a description of the circuit that the prover can make find a convincing proof of a false statement. But yes, the prover does have to communicate the circuit to the verifier. So here, like both P and V, both have to know C and X, this public input X, but only P knows W, the witness W. What I'm saying, so in some contexts, the prover will not have control over like X and C, like the adversary won't. Like it'll be, in imagine in like a blockchain setting where like a roll up or something where the statement being proven, like the circuit C is sort of takes as input a bunch of transactions, like the witness is a bunch of blockchain transactions, and the circuit just checks that they're like all have valid digital signatures and so forth. So an adversary attacking that rollup does not get to choose that circuit. But there could be other settings where the prover itself kind of gets to choose the circuit it's making a claim about. Yes, it does have to communicate what the circuit is to the prover. And in that case, you actually should hash some description of the circuit if you're applying Fiat-Shamir to some interactive protocol. for the prover's claim. Was that clear enough? It's a little bit subtle.
Yeah. No, I understand. It remains public knowledge, but in one case, the verifier is the one choosing the circuit, or
Mhm.
yeah. No, okay, I get it. Okay, I get it.
Great. Yeah. So if you know you're in a setting where the adversary an attacker just has no control over some quantity, you don't have to hash that quantity when you apply Fiat-Shamir. Okay, but if the attacker might have control over that quantity, it's going to provide a proof for some statement, and it gets to control some aspect of the statement. You should hash whatever it might have control over. And I'll try to convey the attack. It's a little easier to convey the attack if we had already covered the GKR protocol, but I don't think. You know what? Maybe I can just do it with like. Yeah, I'll do it. Actually, we saw last session a counting triangles protocol. Like it's actually perfect for that. So in this case, forget about knowing a witness. Like the prover. So apologies for taking so long to go through like circuit satisfiability and then abandoning it. So let's just say the prover claims a graph has with adjacency matrix A. Has no triangles. Okay, and it's going to prove that by using the counting triangles protocol from last lecture. We covered 2 of them from last meeting, and then applying Fiat-Shamir to it. Okay, and let's say in particular it gets to choose the graph. Now, it's actually known that we'll talk today about various kind of gaps in our understanding of like the security of applying Fiat-Shamir in certain settings. But Fiat-Shamir is absolutely known to be secure in this context if you apply it sort of correctly, right? So I'm going to explain how you might apply it incorrectly and it actually won't be secure. So here's how the prover can attack, an adversary can attack this protocol if the input A is not included in the hash used to generate the verifier challenges. Okay, so let's say I don't know, let A be any graph, whether it has enough zero, any graph with or without triangles. Let's just say let's say with many triangles. Okay. So now let's say the prover sort of runs just like attempts one attack on Fiat-Shamir, meaning it just sort of runs like the interactive protocol, like any attack, on the interactive protocol. So it's lying, so it's not. It's almost certainly going to fail to find an accepting transcript. So it just sort of does its best to sort of attack, find a convincing and accepting transcript for the protocol. So using the random oracle, the cryptographic hash function to choose the verifier challenges. Okay, and because the protocol is sound, actually it the verifier will reject with overwhelming probability, like almost certainly. Okay, and it's not going to matter. We're going to see why the attack is going to work anyway. Okay, so at the end of the protocol, remember, if you were here last week, you saw we applied the sum check protocol to a certain polynomial derived from this input A. So the verifier evaluates depending on which protocol it was, which of the 2 protocols we saw, it evaluated one of 2 different polynomials. I'll just pick the simpler of the two protocols. Yeah, so like this was the only information the verifier needed about the input to do the to do its checks in the whole protocol. Okay. So, the reason the verifier, will reject if the prover attempts this attack is because, like, at the very last round of the suncheck protocol, like P made a claim, like let me just call this value G of R1, R2, R3. So P made a claim that G of R1, R2, R3 equals V, like some value V. And the verifier rejected because V does not actually equal like the true quantity. So I'll do it this way. So that G equals some quantity V, that, and the verifier rejected because V, little v here, I call it, little v, because little v did not actually equal G of R1, R2, R3. Okay, so like, it's very easy for an attacker to pass all of the verifier's checks in the suncheck protocol that we saw last week, other than this final one. Now here's the key point. So I went through all of this to just get to the following sentence. So given any V, little v, it's very easy to find some graph, some input A prime, such that the appropriate polynomial derived from A prime has value V. So A prime twiddle of R1 comma R3, A prime twiddle of R1, R2, R2, R3, and R1, R3, all primes, equals V. Okay, and here's the so the like this transcript that the prover generated that was not an accepting transcript for A is an accepting transcript for A prime. Okay, so the transcript the attacker generated that was not accepting, did not cause the verifier to accept for input A is an accepting transcript for A prime. Okay, and it may well be the case that A prime has many triangles when so that's it. So like, if you basically, what happens is, like, you can with a lot of these protocols, such as the suncheck protocol applied for counting triangles last week, right? Like the prover can sort of trivially pass like all of the verifier's checks until the final check or something, and then once the prover for any like fixed input, the prover will almost certainly fail that final check if the prover's claim is false. Okay, but once you know what that final check will be, you can just futz with the input to find another input for which that final check would pass. Okay, because it's kind of like similar to the prover having known in advance what all the verifier challenges would be, and then just finding an input that those challenges would have kind of passed for that input, even though the claim about that input is false. And if you don't hash the input when you apply Fiat-Shamir, then changing the input does not change any of the random challenges. So maybe that's the key point. Like if you don't hash the input or anything else under the adversary's control, when you apply Fiat-Shamir, um, changing the input does not change the verifier challenges sort of used in the course of the Fiat-Shamir protocol, the Fiat-Shamir transformation, the verifier challenges. Okay, so you can kind of just like generate like kind of any transcript that sort of does not um, actually lead to acceptance. Um, Now you actually know like all the challenges, all the Fiat-Shamir challenges in that transcript. And now if you haven't if the Fiat-Shamir transformation is not actually hashing the input, the attacker is free to just change the input, and it doesn't change the challenges. So the attacker can simply change the input to an input for which those challenges would have led to acceptance. Um, Okay, so I hope I'll pause for questions, but I hope at least the rough idea of how the attack works is coming through.
Is it safe to say like to just like hash every uh like to hash everything or like so hash the all the transcripts so far like when it's like needed.
Yeah, I mean that would sort of ensure security, but it gets a little bit subtle where like if you're applying like a snark for R1CS or air or Plankish or something, for circuit satisfiability, and the adversary might have control over the circuit that it's claiming to know a satisfying assignment to, you should also hash some description of that circuit. And I think it's maybe not so natural to think of that circuit as part of the transcript. You sort of think of that, people often think of that circuit as just kind of fixed, but there are settings where the adversary itself actually has control over the circuit. Um, in which case the circuit isn't really fixed and should be considered part of the transcript, like the adversary is like sending the circuit at the start of the transcript or something like that. So it can get a little subtle, like what is part of the transcript. What did the prover send the verifier that should be hashed? You have to treat anything that the adversary has control over as being sent by prover to verifier for hashing. Moreover, these circuits can be really big. So actually, where in typically like applying the Fiat-Shamir transformation is not a bottleneck in runtime for prover or verifier, at least not unless you get into snark recursion, which we can talk a little bit about later. I don't want to use up all of the session kind of babbling about tangents. But yeah, when you start hashing descriptions of circuits, that can actually get to be very expensive. Now it is one nice thing is you only have to hash the circuit like once, and then you can make claims about that circuit forevermore. Um, so you only sort of pay the potentially heavy computational cost of like hashing like a multi megabyte or even gigabyte description of a giant circuit like once to use that circuit. Um, but yeah, that's I guess that's my main sort of caveat or subtlety to make you aware of with respect to sort of the notion of like one in doubt, just hash everything. Is it can be a little subtle what should be included in the hashing. Again, it's anything the adversary might have control over. You should imagine it as the prover at the start of the protocol is sending everything it might have control over to the verifier to sort of tell the verifier like what claim it's actually making. And that information can actually again be quite large in volume. We deal with circuits sometimes with hundreds of millions of gates, and so the description might be gigabytes, a gigabyte file in size or something. Hashing that's not pretty. Does that make sense?
Yes, so like in the blockchain setting, you don't need to hash the circuit because it's fixed.
Yeah. So as long as you really are sure you can think of the circuit as like fixed and not chosen adversarially, then that's correct. Yeah, you just need to be very careful about that. That's very context dependent, I think. Another thing that's I should point out is like, this attack is not as devastating as some attacks might be, in the sense that the prover, the adversary, is not able with this attack to produce a convincing proof of any false statement of its choosing, right? So what it can do is it can like kind of generate transcripts that sort of pass all checks but the final one, and then like kind of choose the inputs to the um, entire claim, so that it like specifically chosen so that that final check would pass, and that is like a very constraining thing on its choices, right? So like it's not like the adversary here would get to um, choose like any graph that it wants, like the specific graph that it cares about, and convince the verifier that that graph has no triangles. No, what it can do is it can generate a bunch of these transcripts that sort of don't actually accept, and that each one has a different value of v, and then it's free to choose any input so that the multilinear extent, this polynomial here derived from that input evaluated at the associated random points equals something from that list of values. Okay, and that so it's entirely possible that all of the graphs satisfying that property like look pretty funky, and like in the real world it'd be able to you'd be able to sort of spot that they're funky looking graphs, and like this claim doesn't really make any sense because this graph is bizarre. So it's possible you could, I don't think people should allow this attack to exist. I think it's dangerous and they shouldn't do that. But I do want to be clear, like if you do allow this attack to exist, it's not like the adversary can find a convincing proof of any false statement of its choosing. It is kind of constrained. And when you've seen, so Trail of Bits found exactly this situation in a lot of snarks out there. So in a variety of deployed snarks, and when they announced it, I think they used the language of like the attacker can find convincing proofs of random statements or something like that, and that's what they were getting at with that language: random statements or random circuits or something. So yeah, it's not like you couldn't necessarily like steal all the money out of a rollup if the rollup fails to hash the circuit or something. Like you'd be quite limited in the kinds of circuits you could actually produce convincing proofs of false statements about. So people should know, more people should be aware of this attack so it doesn't keep being a vulnerability, but at the same time it's not the worst vulnerability to ever that you could ever possibly have. Okay.
So it's only changing changing the input in the last step.
Yeah. So in the counting triangles protocol that we saw from last lecture, the verifier like literally ignores the input. Like it literally does not matter what the input is until the very, very end. And at that point of the protocol, the verifier just evaluates some polynomial derived from the input at a random point and confirms that its value equals some value the prover provided earlier in the protocol. And so yeah, you can just kind of produce a transcript, and like kind of the input to the protocol like doesn't even factor into the transcript in any way until the very, very end. And then once you know like what all those challenges are over the course of the transcript, you can then just select as an attacker some input that would have made that final check pass.
Makes sense.
Yeah, unless the Fiat-Shamir hashing includes the input in the hash, because then futzing with the input actually would change all the challenges, all of the randomness over the entire course of the interactive protocol.
I get it. And so, and this is not related to round by round soundness.
No, yeah, this is completely different. So we'll get that's sort of the main thing I want to try to talk about with the remaining time. So this is a different attack. So yeah, this attack is computationally basically trivial. It's like, just like generate some transcript. If you're not hashing the input when determining the verifier challenges, then just the adversary can just kind of choose the input at the end after it knows what the challenges will be to make the verifiers like final check pass. And so there's no like computationally intensive kind of search for like lucky challenges in this attack. Whereas round by round soundness is all about ensuring that well, we'll get to it, that some other totally different attack isn't very efficient.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to mention that. I'm sorry it wound up taking so long. And yeah, let's just turn back to discussion of Fiat-Shamir, assuming we sort of have hashed everything under the adversary's control. Okay, so as a reminder, we're starting with the 3-message interactive protocol. And when we Fiat-Shamir it, the convincing proofs are just transcripts, accepting transcripts, where the verifier challenge is obtained by hashing the prover's first message, as well as anything else under the adversary's control. So maybe plus other stuff. Okay. So it is known that I mainly want to talk about attacks on Fiat-Shamir today, because I think that is sort of the right way to understand its security. Because it's basically known that in the random oracle model, like the optimal attack on the Fiat-Shamir transform protocol is known. So it's known like what is the best attack. It's called a grinding attack. People also sometimes use the term grinding to refer to a defense against the grinding attack, which can be confusing, but I just wanted to mention that briefly without going into details. Let me tell you what is the grinding attack. So the attacker just iterates over first messages alpha in any order at once. You can choose them at random. They don't have to be at random. It can go over, alpha 1, alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3. It just tries a sequence of alphas. It keeps trying more alphas until it finds one for which the resulting verifier challenge R of alpha is what I'll call lucky. And by lucky, what I mean is the attacker can efficiently identify a gamma such that responding to the challenge beta with gamma leads to acceptance. So alpha beta equals hash of alpha gamma is an accepting transcript. Okay, so it's like the world's dumbest attack. It's just, let's see what happens if I sent this first message alpha. Like, would I happen to sort of get lucky and be able to respond to the verifier's challenge successfully? No. All right, let me just try another alpha. Okay, I didn't succeed again. Let me just try another alpha. Okay, does the attack make sense? Okay, I'll take silence as yes, the attack is clear. So let's talk about let's just say, this attack is known to be optimal. So now I'll repeat that. There's actually a proof of this in the book. Again, it's that proof of optimality. So it's a security proof that basically says there's no better attack than this in the random oracle model. Right? It's stuff gets much trickier if you actually want to replace the random oracle with a concrete hash function. So let's just not worry about that today. So now let's talk about what is like the sort of trade-off between work invested in this attack by the attacker and the probability it succeeds in finding a convincing proof of the desired statement. Work invested by the attacker versus success probability, meaning it finds a convincing transcript. And by the way, this attack, this is an attack that when it does succeed, like it will find an attack, a convincing proof of any false statement. So unlike the whole not hashing the input situation, if the adversary has control over the input, when this attack succeeds, you can apply this attack to anything. So when you can apply this if the prover wants to find a convincing proof that Bob transferred all of his money to the attacker, it can apply the grinding attack, because the grinding attack uses absolutely nothing about the interactive protocol other than it's being Fiat-Shamired. So when this attack succeeds, you can apply it to find a convincing proof of any desired false statement. Okay, so what is the if the prover invests, I don't know, 2 to the 70 hash evaluations into this attack, what is its chance of succeeding and finding a convincing proof of the false statement it's trying to find a convincing proof for? So here's the answer. So let's say the interactive protocol had soundness error epsilon. Okay. And for concreteness, I always like to say, let's say epsilon is 2 to the minus 80. And I choose that because there are some projects that literally use that epsilon today. And so what having soundness error 2 to the minus 80 means is that any particular choice of alpha is lucky with probability at most 2 to the minus 80. So any particular alpha, any particular first message the prover might try out is lucky with probability epsilon. Okay. Which means if the attacker tries t different values for alpha, so it grinds over t different values for alpha, the success probability is about t times alpha. Sorry, t times epsilon. So in this example here, that would be t times 2 to the minus 80. Okay, so some examples. So if it tries 2 to the 70 different alphas, the success probability will be about 2 to the minus 10. And if it tries 2 to the 80 alphas, the success probability will be pretty close to 1. So it won't be exactly 1, but it'll be pretty close. It'll be technically it'll be about 1 over e, which is something like a third or something. But let's just say this is pretty close to 1. Yeah, so there's just this sort of linear relationship. Like you invest, you double the work you invest in the attack, you roughly double the success probability until you make that success probability pretty close to 1, and then you can't really make it any higher anymore. Okay, any questions about that? Does that make sense? Okay. So I do want to contrast this with, so people will say, that because, like, in this case, 2 to the 80 work is what's required to get the success probability of this grinding attack close to 1. People will say this is 80 bits of security. Okay. Now, 80 bits of security, I mean, it's an accurate use of the term, but the term is a little bit vague, because what 80 bits of security means is, in order to get the success probability pretty close to 1, you need to put in 2 to the 80 work. But that doesn't tell you, like, really anything about the trade-off between, if you put in less than 2 to the 80 work, how successful can you be? So let me compare to a birthday attack, to find like a collision in a hash function. So there, if you put in, so on 80 bits of security hash function. So there, if you put in 2 to the 8, let's say T hash evaluations of work, your success probability of finding a collision is about, it's exactly this T times epsilon, but squared. Okay, so that is, it's T squared, not over 2 to the 80, but over 2 to the 160. Right, it's T over 2 to the 80 squared. Until, obviously, until, just as the success probability here sort of topped out around 1, the same thing happens here. So once T is 2 to the 80, you don't get a success probability more than 1. But until T is 2 to the 80, this is a very good approximation of the success probability of the birthday attack after T hash evaluations. Okay, so this is quite a substantial difference, because, for a few reasons. So one is, like, if you invest 2 to the 70 hash evaluations here, with the birthday attack, the success probability will only be 1 over a million or so. Whereas with the same amount of work invested in the grinding attack on Fiat-Shamir, the success probability would be about 1 over 1,000. Right. So while it's the same amount of work for both to get the success probability close to 1, it's very different behavior as you invest more and more work, how quickly does that success probability get close to 1. And this matters for 2 things. So actually, okay. So one is, like, if a bunch of different people, like, each have a budget of like 2 to the 70 hash evaluations that they're willing or able to perform. In this case, with the birthday attack, it would take about 1 million people attempting the 2 to the 70 work attack for one of them to succeed. Whereas with the Fiat-Shamir attack, it only take about 1,000 of them to attempt the attack. So basically, with Fiat-Shamir, because there's this like perfectly linear trade-off between work invested and success probability, if you double the amount of work, and it doesn't matter how that doubling of work is kind of split among many different attacks, you double the success probability. Okay, whereas if, like, you take 2 to the 70 total work and split it among many people with the birthday attack, they'll almost certainly not succeed, right? Because basically it's much better for one individual attacker with the birthday attack to invest T hash evaluations of work than it is for many attackers to each invest some fraction of T. Okay, and this really comes up, I think, in the blockchain context. There was a question last night about, like, okay, so I always like to put out this data point now, but to try to encourage people to sort of set security levels when they use Fiat-Shamir to a level I feel comfortable with, because I have some concerns about this, and I don't think that's a secret. So I point out that the Bitcoin network performs about 2 to the 80 hashes. I think it's like every 30 minutes or so. Now, and of course, there's been an extraordinary investment in ASICs to do hashes for exactly the hash function used by the Bitcoin network, which is like double SHA-256. But nonetheless, it's clear that today, if you had $500,000 and and wanted to just pay for a whole bunch of double shot 256 evaluations, like you could do 2 to the 80 hashes like very quickly. So in this period of time, an hour or so, there's under $1 million of block rewards that get paid out to miners. Okay, so just as a data point of like how many hashes like might be reasonable on modern hardware. So I got this question last night. Well, like, if like this network, which clearly has more hash power than like, any other hash function in the world has hash power devoted to it. If it takes 30 minutes to produce 2 to the 80 hashes, like why not have a timeout after 30 minutes? So just say, hey, prover, like if you can't get me the proof after 30 minutes of the statement you're trying to prove, I'm just going to not accept any proof from you anymore. Okay. So that's a great question. It was asked last night. And my answer is like in some of the most important applications today, such as rollups, essentially no timeout is possible. Or to the extent that, well, I guess a more precise statement is to the extent that it is possible, it is not protective. And it's not protective for a technical reason, because of the linear trade-off in the grinding attack on Fiat-Shamir between work invested in the attack and success probability. And here's let me try to elaborate on this. It's sort of a bit of a subtle point, which I don't think I've really tried to express publicly before until last night. So let me try. Okay, so imagine you have a rollup that let's say every 30 minutes is posting proofs to L1, and when a proof gets posted to L1, it advances the state of the system. And when the state of the system advances, it means like any attacker is going to have to change the statement that they're searching for a convincing proof for, right? So like, basically every time a new proof gets posted to L1 of a rollup, one would need to change the statement that one would need to prove, find a convincing proof for, in order to steal money or just do anything nefarious at all. Okay, so you might initially think, okay, well, every 30 minutes, the attacker is foiled and has to start its search over, its search for a convincing proof of the necessary false statement over. Okay, but that is sort of exactly wrong because of this linear trade-off between work invested and success probability. So the point is, once an attacker on something like a rollup has invested, say, 2 to the 80 hash evaluations of work, and here's the point: it doesn't matter how that work has been split amongst searches for convincing proofs of different statements. So once it's invested 2 to the 80 hash evaluations of work, it will, with probability close to 1, so about 1 over E or something, or maybe it's 1 minus whatever, with probability fairly close to 1, have succeeded, in one of its searches. Okay, so like these rollups are supposed to run forever. And the thing about this grinding attack is just linear search. Okay, so if I'm attacking the rollup, I'm trying really hard to find a convincing proof that Bob sent me all of his money. After 30 minutes, I haven't succeeded. I only invested, 2 to the 60 hash evaluations over those 30 minutes. And what they weren't enough. I didn't find I didn't get lucky. And now the rollup has advanced the state of the system. So I have to sort of start searching for a convincing proof of a different false statement now in order to steal Bob's money. So I go ahead and I start searching, kind of quote from scratch, but these searches don't have it's a memoryless process, right? It's just try a different alpha, try a different alpha, try a different alpha. So I start searching for a convincing proof of the new false statement I need. And, after 30 minutes, I don't succeed. So I update my search to the next statements based on the latest L1 update from the rollup. And I just keep doing this. And if as long as I keep doing this forever and eventually reach 2 to the 80, hash evaluations of work invested, there'll be a very good chance that at some point along the way, I'll have succeeded in finding a convincing proof of one of those false statements that was relevant at the time I was searching for it. Now, this is not the case for a birthday attack, because for a birthday attack, with 2 to the 60 hashes, say that's all the hashes I can do in 30 minutes. With 2 to the 60 hashes for a birthday attack, I'd only get success probability if it was 80 bits of security. What would that be? 2 to the minus 40. Okay, so I'd have to do 2 to the 40, which is, what is that, about 1 trillion attempts. Each of work 2 to the 60 to succeed at a birthday attack at 80 bits of security. Right. So basically, because so you could try, but there the whole timeout thing really is quite effective, because if in 30 minutes I can only do 2 to the 60 hashes rather than 2 to the 80, I can only get my success probability up in each attempt in each 30-minute period to about 1 over 1 trillion, which means I'm going to need to make 1 trillion attempts each, 1 trillion of these 2 to the 60 hash attempts to succeed, which means my total work would actually have to be 2 to the 100. Okay. Whereas with Fiat-Shamir, you'd only have to do 2 to the 20, as long as your work eventually gets up to 2 to the 80, you'll succeed probably close to 1. And 2 to the 100, this really is out of the reach of modern hardware. Now it's, in my opinion, it's not leaving too much of a buffer if slightly better attacks are, discovered on your hash function or something. I think people should be at 128 bits of security to have a buffer. But anyway, so there really is quite a significant difference. It really matters that with Fiat-Shamir, there's a known attack where you invest. It's a memoryless attack. You invest T hashes of effort, and you make your success probability T times epsilon, where epsilon is the soundness error of the thing you're Fiat-Shamiring. And it's not the square of that. It really makes a huge difference if you're trying to exploit kind of timing out as a defense. Okay, does anyone ask a question about that? Did that come across reasonably clearly? Cool. Okay. Yeah, I think this is not discussed much in the book. Actually, I maybe want to update the Fiat-Shamir coverage in the book. Okay, so what else do I want to say about Fiat-Shamir now? Okay, I think I want to discuss 2 things. So I now want to move to many round protocols. And I want to discuss how Fiat-Shamir may not be secure when applied to them. And this is where we get to round by round soundness, which Ethan mentioned earlier. So round by round soundness is a way, is a notion that does ensure Fiat-Shamiring a many round protocol is secure. Okay. So as I indicated at the start, I think the right way to understand all of this stuff is to explain the attacks. The attack is always a grinding attack, but we're just going to work through the grinding attack on different kinds of protocols and see what, exactly how efficient can the grinding attack be when we apply it to, different kinds of protocols. So, yeah, so initially I explained just in the context of a 3-message protocol where the attacker was grinding over the first message of the protocol, and precisely characterized sort of the efficiency of the attack, the trade-off between work invested and success probability. Now let's talk about the same attack, but on a many-round protocol. Okay, so I'm going to discuss a very specific many-round protocol. It is going to be obtained as something called the sequential repetition of a, let's say, one-round protocol with constant soundness error, say with soundness error half. And we're going to see this is the canonical example of a many-round protocol that when you Fiat-Shamir it, what comes out is completely insecure. Okay, so let's see this. So I'm going to describe the one-round protocol. I'm going to make it a little silly. So it's going to be a protocol for the empty language. That just means the verifier should always reject. And if the verifier ever accepts, that's pure soundness error. Okay, and so here's the protocol with soundness error half. Okay, so the prover sends the verifier what is called a nonce. Let me call it alpha, maybe alpha 1. The verifier just ignores the alpha 1. That's why it's called a nonce. And then the verifier sends a random bit, let me call it beta 1, to the prover. And then if that bit is 1, the verifier accepts. And otherwise, the verifier rejects. So the soundness error is a half, because with probability a half, the verifier accepts. That's the soundness error. Okay. So in terms of like statistical soundness, people will call this one bit of, like statistical security, because the soundness error is a half. That's what one bit of statistical security means. K bits of statistical security means the soundness error is 1 over 2 to the K. Okay, so let's say like we actually want to get K bits of statistical security. What sequential repetition will do is just have the verifier repeat this in sequence K times. So rather than just sending, beta 1 and using that to decide whether to accept or reject, we do the same thing again. So alpha 2, which is a nonce, verifier responds with beta 2, and does the same thing about accept or reject. So accepts if beta 2 equals 1 and otherwise rejects. Okay, so we just do this K times, alpha K, beta K. And we say in the sequential repetition, we say, V accepts, in the end of the sequential repetition, only if all K, independent copies of the base protocol accepted. So that is only if, let's say, beta I equals 1 for all I equals 1 to K. Okay, and so the soundness error of this really is 1 over 2 to the K, so that is K bits of statistical security. Right, so basically, in particular run of the base protocol, the soundness error is a half, and the verifier in the end only accepts if every one of those K things accepts, and that happens with probability, 1/2 to the K. Okay, if we apply Fiat-Shamir to this, and note this is a K-round protocol, so we increase the security from 1 bit to K bits, but we also increase the number of rounds from 1 round to K rounds. Now, if we apply Fiat-Shamir to this, we're about to see that it's totally insecure. So the Fiat-Shamir version will only have, at most, it's just totally, at most log K bits of security. So basically, about order K hash evaluations will be enough to attack it, to find a convincing proof for the Fiat-Shamir version. Okay, and that's like, completely unacceptable. We wanted there, if K was 128, we wanted it to require 2 to the 128 hashes. And it only requires 128 hashes. Okay. So let's look at the attack. So in the Fiat-Shamir protocol, right? Like, the prover would send, the transcript consists of, like the prover is like first nonce alpha 1, and then, the verifier's challenge beta 1 is R of alpha 1. And then we have the prover's second challenge, second nonce alpha 2, then the verifier's second, challenge beta 2, which should be, in a multi-round protocol, it should be R of alpha 1 comma alpha 2, and so forth. In a multi-round setting, you should hash, theoretically speaking, like, people normally describe the transformation as hashing all prover messages up to that point. We discussed briefly last night in practice, there's an optimization. You could actually do something called hash chaining. Let's not get into details. It's just a way to avoid in round I having to hash I messages. In each round, it's a way for you to only have to hash 2 messages rather than I messages. So the attacker is looking for a sequence of alpha 1, alpha 2, so a bunch of nonces that cause every beta I to be 1. Okay, and this is what it'll do. So it will grind just on alpha 1 until it finds an alpha 1 such that alpha 1 hashes to 1. So that is this the first run causes the verifier to accept. Okay, and because for any given alpha 1, the probability it hashes to 1 is a half. In expectation, the attacker is only going to have to try like 2 different alpha 1s before it finds one that is good. Okay, once it finds an alpha 1 that's good, it can just fix that alpha 1 for the rest of the attack, right? Then it starts grinding on alpha 2 until it finds an alpha 2 that's good or lucky. So that R of alpha 1 comma alpha 2 equals 1, right? And again, it only has to try 2 alpha 2s in expectation until it finds a lucky one. And then it fixes that alpha 2 and it continues, it moves on to alpha 3 and alpha 4 and so forth. And so in expectation, only 2K hash evaluations are needed in expectation until it succeeds. Okay. So that's what I mean, that the Fiat-Shamir version of this protocol is completely insecure. We went from the interactive version had, K bits of security statistically, but it had many rounds, it had K rounds. And the non-interactive version, the Fiat-Shamir version, only had, the 2K hash evaluations was enough to attack it. So like way, way, way too little. Okay, questions about that? So in general, a R round interactive protocol with K bits of security so you can have a loss that's linear in the number of rounds in terms of the bits of security. So may have only K over R bits of security, meaning 2 to the K over R hashes suffice to attack. The Fiat-Shamir version. Okay. Now, this is where round by round soundness comes to the rescue. So there's a notion of soundness for interactive protocols called round by round soundness. And I'm just, and if you show that so it's like a stronger notion of soundness than standard soundness. In particular, this example we saw before of the sequential repetition of something with constant soundness error does not have good round. It has K bits of standard soundness, but probably only 1 bit or something of round by round soundness. So like, repeating the base protocol many times actually does not improve the round by round soundness at all. So if you show that your interactive protocol has, say, k bits of round by round soundness, then the Fiat-Shamir version will have about k bits of security in the random oracle model. So it rules out this kind of, like catastrophic loss in security in terms of the number of rounds. And intuitively, what round by round soundness means is the following. So in this sequential repetition protocol, the attacker, the prover, to succeed, kind of only had it only had to get a little bit lucky in each round. So each round there was like probability of half that the verifier's challenge in that round was lucky, that is, was 1. And while it was very, very unlikely, like 2 to the minus k probability only, that P gets lucky in all rounds, in each round there was probability half. Okay, and so that's why the round by round soundness error of this thing is only like one, is only a half, is only like 1 bit of round by round soundness. Round by round soundness is sort of a way of formalizing the following intuition. Like R bits of round by round soundness, or sorry, K bits, would mean that there's like some round for the prover to convince the verifier accept. There's some round where the prover has to get like very lucky in that round, meaning the probability the prover gets that lucky in that single round is 2 to the minus k. Okay, so there are certain protocols that are known to be like round by round sound despite having many rounds, like the sum check protocol is one of them. Okay. Basically I sort of hand waved in this study group like the soundness analysis of the sum check protocol a little bit, but basically the analysis says that like if the prover starts with a false claim, okay, it will only convince the verifier to accept if like basically there's some round where the prover sends some polynomial Si of degree 2. It's a univariate polynomial where Si does not equal like Hi, where Hi is like what the honest prover would have sent. Yet when the verifier goes to evaluate Si at a random point, Ri, that point Ri is one at which Si agrees with Hi. And that happens in any particular rounds with probability at most like 2 over size of the field in each round. So basically for the attacker to succeed, and I am being hand wavy here, but this is exactly how the analysis really does go. The attacker has to get very lucky in some rounds. So if this field size is like 2 to the 129, like the round by round soundness really is like 2 to the minus 128, because there's some round like the in each round, like there's some events that the prover, in at least one of the rounds, the prover has to get lucky, and in a sense that only happens with probability to the minus 128 in each of the rounds. So the message is that if people apply Fiat-Shamir to a many round protocol and they want to conclude that the resulting non-interactive protocol is secure, they really should establish that the many round protocol is round by round sound and not just sound. Okay. And I actually have some work that's looking to fill some gaps in this. There are protocols people are using left and right today that have many rounds, which have not been shown to be round by round sound. And it's not that we don't believe the round by round sound. In fact, the point of the work I'm mentioning is to show that they are. It's just no one has bothered to show that they are, and someone should. Okay. So I'll wrap up by discussing just a little bit more. I'll discuss one last attack, which is on not just sequential repetition, but parallel repetition of a base protocol. Before I do that, this is the last thing I'll cover today. Let me pause and see if anyone wants to ask anything. Parallel of a base protocol. No questions?
So just one. So it like if the soundness error of each round is like small, then it's round by round sound.
Well, no, it's a little more complicated than that, because the notion of, quote, soundness error of each round is not, it's generically not clear how to define that, right? Because soundness error is like, the way that's defined is like the probability that the verifier accepts at the end of the protocol. So how do you define soundness error of an individual round when the verifier doesn't make its decision till the very end of the protocol? But round by round soundness is basically a way of formalizing that. So they'll talk about something called a doomed set. And, if the prover's claiming a false statement is true, it's required that the prover kind of starts the protocol in a doomed set. The only way, you have to show that the only way that the verifier will accept a false statement as valid is if there's some verifier challenge across each round that sort of takes the prover from the doom set into like outside of the doom set. And this is kind of a way of formalizing what it means to have soundness error in each round individually. It's like the probability of getting a challenge that takes the prover, from inside the doom set to outside of the doom set. So I know that's pretty vague, and maybe it gives just a little bit of a sense.
So are there places where I can look into this, or like?
Yeah, sure. I'll post the link in the chat afterwards. And actually, I'll post a paper that has a nice theorem that's about to that addresses parallel repetition and round by round soundness. So yeah, it's a nice clean notion. So I'll send a link, and also hopefully this new thing I'm working on, which is just establishing some popular protocols around by round sound that haven't previously been shown before, will also be useful and available not too far in the future.
Yeah. Thanks.
May I ask another question? Maybe just to clarify a bit rules of the game. Namely speaking, the exponential reduction of the security you just illustrated seems to be related with the fact that for the first case, it is allowed to have only one guess per each round. But for the second case, we can make as much guesses as we need until we succeeded. And it actually causes this reduction. Well, can you please explain a bit this point?
Yeah. So by the first case, do you mean the interactive protocol?
Yeah, where we have 2 power in k probability that we will succeed. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
But yeah, then we apply. Sorry, we apply Fiat-Shamir. We can calculate hashes until we succeeded, right? So we can repeat. We have many attempts per each round, right? That's the so.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I guess like that's right. So in like the interactive protocol with soundness error 2 to the minus 128, but 128 rounds or something, it's like the prover only kind of gets like one attempt. So it kind of has to run the protocol from start to finish. It never gets to kind of rewind and try again or something like that. So the only chance it convinces the verifier to accept is if it gets lucky in every single one of the 128 rounds. So the probability of that is just 2 to the minus 128. Whereas once you Fiat-Shamir it, the attacker can kind of repeat round 1 as many times as it needs until it gets lucky there. And once it gets lucky there, it can kind of it's sort of just like own that round and can forget about it, and can move on to round 2 and repeat that as many times as it needs until it gets lucky there. And so it's this ability to like rewind the protocol and like restart it and like try out a different nonce or something that is the key to the grinding attack being so efficient on the Fiat-Shamir version, whereas the success probability of the attacker on the interactive version is so small. Was that helpful?
Yeah, but question is, is it possible somehow to limit attacker to prevent that kind of attack?
Yeah, so I think the only thing you could really do is this timeout approach where you say, hey attacker, like, if you don't get me the proof within 10 minutes of making the original claim or something, I'm just going to not accept any proofs from you. And that will limit the number of grinding attempts that the attacker can do, which will in turn limit its success probability. So, in like 10 minutes, maybe the attacker can only do, 2 to the 50 hashes or something. So, and 2 to the 80 would be required to succeed with probability close to 1, something like that. But I was trying to explain before about like this roll-up context where like that kind of timeout approach is not really workable in that particular application, because the application like kind of has to run forever, and if the attacker can just try to attack like continuously for all time, and as long as it eventually spends 2 to the 80 work, it'll find a convincing proof of a false statement. So the answer is like in some applications, like this sort of timeout thing might maybe be effective, but in other applications it's just not an option. And the solution is simply to configure your protocol to have more than 80 bits of security, so that even though the attacker might literally try to attack you forever, it's still just all of the compute power in the world running for 10 years isn't enough or whatever for the attack to succeed with any decent probability. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I guess another subtlety, and I know I'm over time, but I guess I'll just keep going. People who have to drop off, I have covered most of what I wanted to say. There is a difference sort of between, interactive security, like interactive security levels, and non-interactive. So if you actually run, let me just spend a couple minutes discussing this. So if you actually run an interactive protocol and you don't apply Fiat-Shamir to make it non-interactive, it might be reasonable to configure the thing to only have like 40 or 60 bits of security, something like, let's say 60 bits of security. Whereas with once you Fiat-Shamir it, like that is completely unacceptable. Like that you could break with like probably a few $1,000s at most, maybe less than that. So that for non-interactive, I really think you should basically always have 128 bits of security is my personal recommendation. Why is different security levels appropriate? So with an interactive protocol, the attacker actually has to talk to the verifier to know whether an attempted attack will succeed or not. Okay, so which means like, so imagine, like some prover kept trying to prove things to you and kept getting caught in a lie, right? Like you probably, after the attacker got caught in a lie, a million times, you probably would just stop interacting with that attacker or something. Moreover, even if you didn't ever stop interacting with the attacker, simply the fact that there are like round trip delays, and it's an interactive protocol and it just takes time to send messages across the internet or something, will just sort of limit the number of attempts that can be attempted. So like Ethereum, I think I looked up, like if you wanted to make I think it produces 1 billion blocks roughly every 3 years or something, right? So if you needed to if you were using a randomness beacon from the, like the block headers on the Ethereum blockchain or something, and you wanted to attempt an attack, 1 billion times, it would take a minimum of like 4 years, and you'd be paying gas fees every single block and some crazy thing like that, right? So you just simply can't attempt that many attacks. Like you can't, and every time you want to try the attack, it only succeeds with probability 2 to the minus 60, and you don't actually know if it will succeed or not until you try it. You pay the gas fee, you wait the block. Okay. Whereas with something Fiat-Shamir to be non-interactive, the attacker can do all the attacks in its own head without anyone ever even knowing that it's trying out the attack. So it can, very, very quickly do, 2 to the 60 attacks for like a few $100s or something, and no one even knows that it tried it. So it's a totally different scenario in terms of the feasibility of trying out many attacks. And for that reason, something like soundness error 2 to the minus 60 might be fine for an interactive protocol. Whereas if you Fiat-Shamir it, it's just like completely insecure, even if it is round by round sound at 60 bits of round by round soundness. Did that make sense? Does anyone want to ask a question about that? Okay. So final topic for today. So I think that there's like kind of a general sense out there that kind of I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I'm just going to say, like, you know, it's possible that, you know, there are many people have a general sense that kind of sequential repetition is like the only real example of a technique, you know, that's like sort of insecure, you know, when combined with Fiat-Shamir. You know, so basically the example we just saw where you repeat, you know, something many times sequentially to drive the soundness error down and then Fiat-Shamir it, and it turns out you haven't actually improved the protocol at all compared to no repetitions. And I want to point out via an attack that this is not true. So you wind up with somewhat similar issues. They can't be quite as bad, but even with parallel repetition. So let me explain. So you might say, oh, I know if I'm Fiat-Shamiring something, I shouldn't do sequential repetition because it just won't help at all once I Fiat-Shamir. So you might say, okay, I'm going to take this protocol. Let's say it's 2 rounds, I don't know, 5 messages. So alpha, I don't know, beta 1, gamma, beta 2, and I don't know, I need another letter. I don't know, sigma. So let's say this has 64 bits of security. So soundness error 2 to the minus 64. And that's not enough if you want to Fiat-Shamir it, as we just discussed. So you say, I want to get it down to the minus 128, but I don't want to do sequential repetition, which will increase the number of rounds and won't help at all after I apply Fiat-Shamir. So I'm just going to repeat it in parallel twice. Right. So like I'm just going to independently run the protocol again, alpha prime, but sort of not, you know, not by increasing the number of rounds. I'm just going to stick a prime everywhere to indicate the other repetition. Right. So like in round 1, the prover is going to actually send both alpha and alpha prime. The verifier is going to apply with both beta 1 and beta 1 prime, and, you know, and so on and so forth. In the next message, it'll be gamma and gamma prime. So you might say, okay, I haven't increased the number of rounds. So great. Now I'm at 128 bits of security. No more rounds. Apply Fiat-Shamir. Okay. So the key point here that I'm going to exploit for an attack is that the original protocol here is not 1 round. It's 2 rounds. And after I do parallel repetition, I didn't increase the number of rounds, but it's still 2 rounds. You know, so while I didn't increase the number of rounds, I also obviously didn't decrease the number of rounds. So it's still 2 rounds. And so you could wind up in a situation where you're like sort of in just as bad a situation as taking like a 1 round thing sequentially repeated twice. You know, because that also really yields a 2 round protocol. Okay, and I'm going to show you the attack. This will happen. It's not that it might happen. It will happen. It will happen if you Fiat-Shamir this parallel repetition. Okay, so the message here is really just that, like, if your protocol is more than 3 messages and you apply Fiat-Shamir to it, okay, you should show its round by round sound if you're going to assume like no loss of concrete security at all when you go to when you look at the Fiat-Shamir version, because a lot of things actually do really lead to a loss in concrete security. It's not just sequential repetition when you Fiat-Shamir it. Okay, so let me explain the attack it's always a grinding attack, right? The grinding attack, I mean, in the random oracle model, it's just like it's known to be optimal, but it also can be extremely effective. So here's the attack on this parallel repetition after you Fiat-Shamir it. So the attacker grinds on alpha and alpha prime, so like the first round message in the repeated protocol. Okay, until one of, and it's very important, it only needs one of the 2 Beta 1 equals, R of alpha prime comma 1, or beta 2 equals R of alpha prime comma 2 is lucky. Right? Remember, beta 1 or beta 2 is lucky if that challenge, allows the prover to own that repetition, to just have, be able to answer, with a gamma, such that for any, beta 2, the prover can come up with a convincing sigma, right? So when I say lucky, I mean, if beta 1 is lucky, the attacker is simply has basically just one repetition 1. Once it gets a lucky beta 1, it can complete the transcript for repetition 1, no problem. Okay, and this is the key point. It only has to get lucky on one of beta 1 and beta 2, not on both of them, because there's another round left. Okay, so let's say it gets lucky on beta 1, so it fixes beta 1, it fixes the lucky beta 1. Okay, and then it grinds. It uses the second round to grind until it gets a lucky beta 2 prime. So then it grinds over gamma prime until it gets a lucky beta 2 prime, enabling it, to win repetition 2. Okay, and what's key here is that it had a second round left over to exploit, to grind on. So it could just sort of fix the first messages to get lucky in one of the two, and it still has another message to grind on to try to get lucky in the other run that it didn't get lucky on via the first message. And yeah, so the grinding on to succeed on one of the two, in expectation, will only take 2 to the 64 hash evaluations. And so after 2 to the 64 hash evaluations, it's almost certainly gotten lucky on the first repetition, or one of the two repetitions, and then it starts grinding on the second, on the remaining one, and that will just take another 2 to the 64 hash evaluations again. So the total number of hashes for this attack is, in expectation, 2 to the 64 plus 2 to the 64, which is only 2 to the 65. So it's literally the case that the second repetition, it basically bought you nothing in security. You're no better off. You're at most, 1 bit of security better off than you were by not repeating it at all. Okay. Now, if you did go to a third repetition, it would be okay. You would go from 64 to 128 bits of security, because basically, the attacker, could use round 1 to get lucky on one of the two with only 2 to the 64 grinding attempts. It could use round 2 to get lucky in another one of the repetitions, but then there's a third repetition there, and there are no more rounds left. So what it really means is, by some pigeonhole principle sort of thing, it really does have to get lucky for 2 out of the 3 repetitions in a single grinding attack. Yeah, so there's actually, I'll post this paper in the chat, but it's known, if you have a K-round protocol, let's say R-round protocol, with A bits of security, statistical security, let's say, and you repeat it in parallel, okay, let's say R plus 1 times, I think. Yeah, I think that's right. And apply, the round by round soundness. Is at least 2K. Okay. So the idea is, so it's just formalizing kind of what I sketched above, which is, this was a 2-round protocol. If we repeated it twice, the security level as far as Fiat-Shamir was concerned, so the round by round soundness, essentially didn't increase at all. Okay. So 2 rounds, 2 repetitions didn't help. Like the second the repetition didn't help. But if you did 3 repetitions, it would. It would give you it would like sort of logically give you what you would hope for with 1 repetition. So basically, if you had like a 10-round protocol, if you repeated it 10 times in parallel, it would sort of behave as you wished it would behave if you repeated it twice in parallel. If you repeated it 20 times in parallel, it would behave. You need 10 repetitions to functionally act like 1 repetition would. So 20 repetitions would functionally act like 3 repetitions, and 30 repetitions would act like 4, and 40 would act like 5. So it's like, yeah, repetitions like 2, 3, 4 up to 9 don't help if it was a 10-round protocol, but the 10th one does help. Okay, so I know this is a lot to follow, and maybe you're not getting all of it, but I hope at least the attack is clear. And yeah, I think the attacks are exactly how to understand the subtleties of Fiat-Shamir's security, and make sure you avoid the potential pitfall, which I'm worried at some point will really result in something bad happening, where people just Fiat-Shamir stuff and kind of just assume everything's okay. It's surprising the grinding attack is more effective than you might realize, unless you actually just see the attack in action in various contexts. Okay, so that's everything I had to say today. I know I went way over, so thank you for sticking around if you're still here. If you do have any questions, I can stick around for another few minutes. Otherwise, next week I'm traveling. I'll say that again in the chat, and I'll see you in 2 weeks, and we'll start talking about the GKR protocol, I believe. So thanks so much again. Talk to you soon, or please ask a question.
Thanks, Justin.
Yeah, thank you.